Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our last talk on the diversity and inclusion in STEM part 2. How do we move from theory to practice? Before we start, I would like to give a special thanks to all our sponsors that made our event possible. And now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Amelia-Juliette Demery. She's a PhD student at Cornell University. And thank you very much, Amelia, for joining us. I would also like to thank the people from UNC Charlotte that are helping us with this Zoom session. So thank you very much, Amelia, for accepting our invitation and for being here with us. The stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay. Can everyone see that? Hopefully so.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so I'm going to be talking about safer science, how to learn safe fieldwork strategies for at-risk researchers, their supervisors, and institutions. Let's see. There we go. As I was introduced, I'm Amelia-Juliette Demery. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a PhD candidate at Cornell University and a Sloan Foundation Fellow. I study the genetics and evolution of color variation in birds. I specifically nerd out about how bird beaks change color across space and time. I will be representing myself and Monique Pipkin, who is the phenomenal co-first author for our paper, without whom there would be no fieldwork safety paper. She is also a PhD student at Cornell University and a Sloan Foundation Fellow. And she studies the ecological drivers and outcomes of feather coloration in birds, specifically the adaptive value of their iridescent feathers. So we want to preface our talk by first saying that our perspectives are shaped by our unique experiences. And because of that, we wanted to design these strategies to apply to any and all fieldwork environments. So our goal in this presentation is to educate people on how they could apply these strategies, followed by Q&A if anyone has any questions. First, we're going to start with the concept of risk in the field, because this is unique to one's identity, one's background, and therefore what it means before going into the field, in the moment that risk occurs, and the downstream effects. So fieldwork on its own is isolating. It usually places a researcher in an unfamiliar environment or with unfamiliar people. And this is not restricted to remote locations or areas where you do not speak the local language. This can also extend to areas in which you are not a native, field sites where they're virtual strangers cohabiting with each other, or just entering a new lab on a summer internship. There's still isolation. There are still new social dynamics that might manifest as time goes on, or social dynamics that you are unaware of when you enter. In short, there's a lot of uncertainty that can create situations that would not occur at your home institution or your home environment. So let's combine the isolating characteristics of fieldwork with the everyday risks that come with marginalized and underrepresented identities in STEM, but also in the societies and cultures that we come from. Individuals with these identities already encounter risk in everyday life that can range from harassment and death. So there's a compounding of risk when certain individuals conduct fieldwork, because the risks they encounter in normal life can be exacerbated in the more isolated and unfamiliar environment that fieldwork often brings. And we don't want to forget the further exacerbation of risk encountered by intersectional identities and identities in transition, because these identities do not exist in a vacuum and they can change throughout an individual's life. Some identities that could be at increased risk due to implicit biases and prejudices include those related to race and ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and religion. And the asterisk is to further hit home that these identities are not exclusive to one another. Intersectionality and transition can compound the risks even more. Now, having defined risk, we're now going to show the vignettes from our paper that illustrate different examples of potentially risky situations. And these illustrations were done by Callie Chappell, who is an ecology PhD student and a professional illustrator at Stanford University. We want to give a shout out to the individuals who shared their experiences with Callie to recreate real life situations that researchers of different identities have experienced. And we want to acknowledge that these vignettes might trigger past trauma for people in the audience. When we think of the risk posed to underrepresented demographics, more often than not, this vignette may come to mind. A researcher who's alone, dark of skin, being approached by a police officer and hoping and praying that they survive. The feelings in this moment are familiar to me personally. The area around my field site has Confederate flags and signage that denotes mass slave burial sites. And it's really scary to be out doing field work and see a random car slow down, see someone I don't recognize making a U-turn, or notice that there's more police cars driving by more frequently than I would personally expect. This vignette shows a Sikh researcher who is a member of an underrepresented religion going into the field and seeing signage that is nationalist and or nativist, signage that is not as uncommon as you would think while being out in the field. And this illustration demonstrates that passive hostility is still hostility, and it creates risk in the form of stress and anxiety, these like what if thoughts about what could happen if a researcher returns to a place that has publicly stated that outsiders are not welcome. So in the United States, there were towns that would post signs saying that they are sundown towns, and that was a passive signal that someone who doesn't belong would encounter trouble if they stayed too long in the neighborhood. This third vignette depicts a white male researcher who is a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, conducting fieldwork and enduring verbal harassment by passerby. And this illustration shows that the condition of being at risk is fluid with respect to fieldwork. It extends to any identity that is viewed as different from the local community in which the research is being conducted. In some cases, fieldwork presents a situation where a majority identity at their home institution can be the minority identity at the field site, whether nearby or international. This vignette shows a deaf botanist being harassed by someone in the field due to their disability. And it's very important for two reasons. First, it serves to show that risk is not always through being visibly different. There are many researchers in STEM with conditions under the surface that they have to cope with every day, and they face discrimination by people who do not understand or empathize with their researcher's background, or they perceive the researcher's differences as justification for prejudice and harassment. The second reason is that in the previous vignettes, we showed perpetrators as exclusive to the local environment in which fieldwork is being conducted. But in this vignette, we really don't know whether the perpetrator is a stranger walking onto the field site or someone who the researcher knows. And we know that in the majority of sexual harassment and assault cases, the predator is someone that the survivor knows. So it is beyond important to understand and appreciate that risk in the field is not restricted to outsiders. And for many cases, risk can occur from perpetrators within one's own STEM community and or their professional network. So given the variety of places that at-risk situations can occur, both at home, in country, or abroad, researchers and supervisors must work under the expectation that prejudice can arise in any situation. And the repercussions for experiencing that risk can be equally diverse in how it manifests. There can be physical consequences, up to and including death, as we see in the vignettes and we've seen in all forms of media coverage for years. The mental consequences are equally traumatic, passive descriptions of discrimination that weigh on the psyche at the field and beyond. Verbal harassment by passerby. And misguided anger, harassment, and assault. It is one-sided discrimination for the simple reason that someone looks different, acts different, loves different, expresses different, and another person comes in and says, because of who you are, I am justified in harming you and harassing you, and I think I have a right to do that, and that is simply not okay. The physical and mental consequences of risk manifest into professional downstream impacts. First, we have decreased productivity because the risk and the trauma incurred from that risk does not stay at the field site. It bleeds out into other aspects of life. There's also professional development, especially when we think about the support network and mentorship, because the risk encountered by the researcher, it harms them, but what if their support network doesn't know how to deal with it? What if they don't feel like they have a support network that would understand? What if the mentorship doesn't have the resources or the skills to identify what needs to be done to keep that student productive or feeling safe in their research program? And lastly, retention in STEM. All of this compounds on each other through time of, do I belong? Do I even have a place here? Is it worth it to stay if I'm going through this and I don't have the support that I need? The National Center for Education Statistics published a 2019 report that showed that underrepresented undergraduate students were switching out of STEM majors at a faster rate than majority identities, showing that demographic disparities in the STEM workforce, and notably in the emerging STEM workforce, which is diversifying, is due to a problem of retention and not recruitment. Historically, when we think about causes of demographic disparities in STEM, the metaphor used is a leaky pipeline, as you see on the slide. So as people enter STEM education, some may drop out due to random acts of chance or passive neglect of the existing system. So the presumption is, well, oh, well, you can't help everyone, or the system was originally perfect, but it just needs to be repaired. And that's really not true. This leaky pipeline is actually a colander. So instead of being a leaky pipeline, a colander is systematically designed to keep certain demographics in, because historically, those were the only demographics with the opportunity and the access to enter the STEM workforce at all. So therefore, the holes in which other demographics fall through are not through intentional malice, not through neglect of the existing system, but unintentional apathy for the backgrounds and identities that do not match those of the historical STEM workforce. So at this point, we have defined risk in STEM, we've illustrated the diversity of its manifestations in the field, and we've also discussed the downstream impacts that have driven many underrepresented identities out of STEM. We will now talk about strategies to mitigate risk at all levels using the vignette of the Black ornithologist, because this is the identity that Monique and I both identify with, because we've lived through different fieldwork experiences through that lens. We want to preface that there is no way to completely eliminate risk during fieldwork, and that some of our strategies that we share have existed within the whisper networks of our colleagues. They're usually informally shared to make others feel safer in the field. So these strategies have been used by professionals in the field. However, we also want to preface that everyone is different. So we want to really drive home that these strategies are flexible and they can and should be tailored to your situation and your comfort levels. So let's start with the researcher. The researcher is the individual conducting fieldwork or the outdoor activity. They're the ones who will be directly interacting with risk, and historically has been the one on which the responsibility to mitigate risk falls on their shoulders. So this would be the researcher. It could be techs, it could be students, graduate, undergraduate, environmental engineers, nature enthusiasts, etc. So one big strategy for this vignette in which this researcher is alone is to engage in field work with another person. We see in this vignette that the Black ornithologist is being approached by the police, and this is historically a very antagonistic dynamic. So if this researcher was in a group, there would be additional credibility and legitimacy to why they're in that place in the first place. The other person can engage with the police on their behalf. And for general safety, it's really smart that in case you get hurt, you're unconscious, or if you're arrested, then there's another person who could get help or call for help if you are in trouble. Second, you could carry credentials and wear identifying clothing. This is another really good way to de-escalate situations and provide credibility for why you're in that field site or in that area. This can include permits, IDs, vehicle passes. Clothing has been a very common identifier to give legitimacy, especially if it shows affiliation with the university, with the institution, with the field work site. In some field locations, there's mistrust of universities and elite institutions. So just local standard attire like field clothes is also good. And then third, and very important, if at any time you feel unsafe or had a risky encounter, report it. Report it when you're ready, when you feel comfortable, and also report all incidents up the chain of command, because you cannot make change if the parties who are designed to help and have the power to create that change don't know about the risks. This can be talking to your supervisor, your department head, your ombudsman or human resources, anyone who could help you mitigate and report your situation. This is also really good for allies to come in. If colleagues can report, if advisors can act as an intermediary to avoid interactions or harassment that could lead to further harm. Especially for the supervisor, because their role is to respond and support, and they will likely be the person most directly interacting with you after risk has occurred in the field. So let's move on to the supervisor. This is the individual with direct authority of the research and the researcher. They help provide support, respond, and mitigate risk. This could be a principal investigator, the advisor. It could be a collaborator at a field site, whether domestic or international, an outdoor education leader. This could be the graduate students that are responsible for the undergraduate students in the field, or a field course professor. The goal of the supervisor is to foster inclusive culture, to help individuals mitigate specific issues in the field, act as an intermediary if there are conflicts, and be a direct conduit to the researcher for the necessary resources to mitigate risk or improve the researcher's experience in the field in general. So what can the supervisor do? First off, self-education. Supervisors want to be helpful. That means they need to prepare, self-educate on the experience of your team members' identities and the corresponding risk. Understand how risk may affect your researchers differently and what the lasting impacts could be. Most often than not, it's decreased productivity and a lasting fear after risky events. And the risky events could also be world events too. Be aware of what is going on and what could be affecting your researchers' lives. And provide support when reporting incidents, especially if it involves law enforcement or other types of bodies in which there may be a predisposition to not feel comfortable. Also be able to modify, have apparel, official vehicles. These are other examples of providing resources for the researcher to be safer. You could also ask your researcher. However, we really think that you need to self-educate without asking your researchers to relive past trauma. There is a lot of resources available to learn about the experiences of other identities, and it should never involve asking your researcher to relive past trauma so that you can learn. There are other ways. Second, review and agree upon fieldwork and safety plans with the researcher before any fieldwork begins. There are awesome templates about this. One that Monique and I love to shout out is the University of California Field Safety Plan template. It has a ton of research and field courses and lots of templates to get out of the gate and create a field safety plan. Some really important questions to include: what does a researcher do when risk presents itself? Are they checking in with someone? Are they being tracked? Does someone know where they're going when they leave the field site, when they enter the field site? What happens if the researcher is arrested? Who should be the emergency contact? And then assist in acquiring resources necessary for safe fieldwork. So again, having institutional resources like field vehicle with clear labels, reporting mechanisms, that chain of command, and finding holes. Is anything lacking? And using the power as a supervisor to ask institutions to get access to those resources. Third, discuss field safety and associated risk with all team members. Safety should be discussed with everyone. There may be a fear of retaliation, of singling out at-risk and diverse members. And this is actually in some people's contracts that have language like contracts saying you cannot have any sort of discriminatory speech. But we all agree that safety is important. So the easiest way to solve that is to just discuss safety with everyone. Everyone is going to benefit from it. One good way to do it is to just use our paper or use the recording of this event to start the discussion. Also use the hashtag #SaferScience, and then lean on the department institutional seminars that talk about field safety. So now we go to the department and institution, the larger organizing body of where fieldwork occurs. The role of the department, institutions, the universities, the museums, the field stations is to educate individuals and provide resources to prepare for field work. That is the goal. So what can they do? First, basic education. Make available a general field safety training, harassment training, first aid courses, diversity, equity, inclusion, and mentorship resources. This creates an equitable starting place for researchers and supervisors. It also establishes the norm that this is important to the institution. They care about this. And so anyone that they employ needs to care about this too. Then inform and advise about the benefits of acting responsibly with care and potential ramification. Again, we want to increase retention of diverse individuals. And we know that retention is not just about getting money or grants or increasing recruitment. It's about changing the culture and providing the mentorship that researchers need. So you need to have incentives that, oh, it's good for you if you care about this, if you do stuff in your lab to make sure that it's inclusive, but there also needs to be accountability, potential legal and social ramifications if someone fails to invest in safety, because the supervisor and the institution are responsible for the safety of the researchers, and they will likely be liable if things end up badly. Lastly, provide resources to give credentials and increase safety. This could be very wide-ranging in how it manifests. Courses, establish reporting mechanisms, an official letter of support for the researcher to bring to their field site, devices on loan for doing remote work, to keep track of where people are, field vehicles, safety vests, dual purpose of like identifying, giving credibility, and can be good for high vis for additional safety if you're in a place where it's a hunting season. The example on the slide is Bree Putnam's lab from the California State University of San Bernardino, where they conduct their urban wildlife research. So for more strategies, use the hashtag #SaferScience. Feel free to take a snapshot or a screenshot of this screen because our paper is one of many. There are so many different resources that a lot of other really great professionals at all levels of this system have done to make science safer for everyone. We want to thank everyone who has given amazing feedback and contributions to this project, and anyone who has ever shared fieldwork safety suggestions through the Whisper Network. We want to thank Cornell University's Diversity Inclusion Committee, as well as the American Ornithological Diversity Inclusion Committee, Black AF in STEM, and of course, Callie R. Chappell for her amazing illustrations. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Amelia, on this amazing talk. It's a very important topic, and also the slides were very nice. The illustrations are wonderful. Congratulations, very important topic. I do have some questions here in the chat. The first one is from Lina Caballero. In Latin America, many times we have to go to the field alone due to lack of resources, and I even had to take my daughter to the field because I had no one to take care of her. How is this situation in the USA, and do you know of initiatives to support people with care roles who must go to the field?
That is an excellent question. That's a very good question. I would say from my personal experience, when I started going out into the field, I was also going out alone as well. I think it's pretty common in the United States for researchers to go alone, with the exception being if they're part of what those like really large field work projects where it's an actual site and there's a whole team. I would say that from my experience, when I go out alone, I always text my advisors, or I'll text someone. For example, I have some friends who know my location at all times, so that if something does happen, they know kind of where I am, or they could like find me. I would say when it comes to caregivers, that is a very specific identity that I think unfortunately does not get thought about enough when it comes to doing field work. I think historically, because when we think about people doing field work, we think about someone who isn't a caregiver or is just out there on their own independently. So in that case, I would really push to design a fieldwork safety plan with the advisor, with the institution, and push for those resources. Because again, it goes back to that, to the liability and the accountability, where we want to make fieldwork safe. And for someone who's a caregiver, that is not the same as someone who doesn't have a dependent with them or doesn't have to think about that in the back of their mind.
Thank you very much for your answer. We do have some comments in the chat. Eliane de Freitas said, "What an amazing talk, Amelia. It's an important source of information in order to protect us. Thank you." Maria Eduarda de Andrade Borges said, "Very important lecture. Thank you so much for sharing with us, Amelia." And I do have a question of my own. So related to that, you said right now, what is how can we use maybe technology to help us to ensure a safety environment in the field? For example, sharing our GPS points at the whole time or something like this. Do you have other tips for how to use technology to help us?
Yeah, I think the first thing that jumped up to my mind was to, again, like creating that equitable like workspace. I think one thing that knowing where everyone is really important, but also knowing kind of how people, like kind of the standard to which people should interact is also important. I have some colleagues that when they go to like international field sites and there are people from like 5 different labs or 5 or multiple institutions, and there's if there are just different kind of like social dynamics or expectations of, oh, you're supposed to act like a certain way when you go into the field, and that may not be comfortable for everyone. So I would, to like go back to kind of using technology, I would make all the resources available for people who are on a field team or people who are going into the field to understand, oh, this is how you conduct yourself at the field site. Here are the here's all the different guidelines and agreements that everyone agreed to. Here's what to do if someone is in like physical harm. Here's what to do if someone is uncomfortable, or here's what you can do if you're uncomfortable. Kind of like it all kind of ties together into like active bystander training, or having a checklist can be really helpful for like, all right, if I see someone who's in an uncomfortable situation, here are the different things that I can do to make sure that they feel safe, make sure that they feel comfortable. Or if I'm in an uncomfortable situation, here's what I can do. And making that available to everyone is a really great way to ensure, okay, we want to be able to check on you and know where you are, but if you're the only person there, or if we can't get to you fast enough, you don't have to think about like, oh my gosh, what do I do? All of that stuff is already available. And technology is really great. I would also print everything out too, just in case like there's no spare battery or there isn't. It doesn't hurt to have different types of materials for for sending the same message.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Another question that I have related to that is, how can we use scientific communication or other types of communication to spread out this valuable information and to reach as most people as we can in different languages from different countries?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's such a great question. As Monique and I have been talking about how while we really like the range of viewers that and like readers of our paper, it's still a scientific article. And when you can't people are not going to immediately be like, oh, I'm going to read this when I'm going out birding, or I'm going to read this when I'm going on a camping trip. When these strategies should and are usually used in those same environments or those same kind of like social spaces. So I would say that I would say that like to make it kind of part of the normative culture in how you teach, part of the normative culture, and when you talk about science, that to incorporate some aspect of diversity and inclusive practices into the science itself. And that could be in just like how you guide like your class, or how you how you establish like a new research project. But it's those little things that kind of change how people think and approach something in a way that is not as, I guess, not as, I'm kind of blanking on the correct descriptor, but isn't as like alien as like, oh, only scientists should care about this, or this is only important to scientists, when it's not true at all. And I think just it's really, we have all these resources and all of this great literature that people have published over the years about making science and making STEM more inclusive. And so we have all these resources already, and we have the power to really communicate it effectively so that it has an impact that goes beyond what we study. I got on a little bit of a ramble there, so I hope that made sense.
Oh, it makes sense. Yeah. Thank you very much. Another question from Lina Caballero as well. How to support people doing field work abroad, and we should think more about support even psychologically.
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay, so there are like two questions there. I would say for the psychological support, that is really big. Some of the people that we've spoken to, they talk about how most of their concern is from the mental harm rather than any like physical or like social harm, because they're so isolated. And being able to understand that really requires a space being made for that researcher to know. I don't have any academics in my family, so I didn't really know kind of what I was getting into when I went into higher education. And there were some really hard lessons learned about like the risks involved or what I need to prepare for. And I think making the space available for a researcher to understand, hey, you should take care of yourself, you should have self-care, or to just being asked like, are you okay, what can I do? I think it's really important for the researcher to be able to say that, but I don't think it's as important as the supervisor, the department, institution saying this is okay to talk about. We encourage us to talk about, because we care about you. You are part of this community. We are accountable for you, and that also includes your mental health. Now, going to the international work, some really good tips that Monique and I have heard from our colleagues that do international field work is to really make sure it's like a team dynamic. So if your advisor won't be in the field site with you, make sure you have a point of contact, or you have an ally in the field, or someone who is from the area who understands, especially for some identities. Like if you identify as LGBTQIA+, and you do field work in specific countries where identifying like that, expressing that is a crime, that needs to be known, that needs to be made like a very apparent, and there needs to be support for that to be able to ensure that they're as productive as possible and enjoying without learning the hard way. Like there should be no chance for a student or like an undergrad student to go to an international field site and feel like they got a curveball, because they can't think of everything. And I think it's really important for the supervisor and any supervisors at the international field site to work together with that researcher to make sure they have not just like, oh, this person has got my back at my college, but no, you have a full network of people who are going to support you.
Thank you very much for the answer. I think I don't see more questions in the chat, so I would like to thank you very much again for participating on our event. It was amazing talk. It's a very, very important topic. I'm glad that you are dedicating yourself to it. It's very important. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Like it's really great to see just the impact this paper has had, and we're just really grateful to be able to talk about it and really, just drive home the importance of field safety, because it takes a village. So thank you for having us. This is really wonderful.
Yeah, thank you very much for participating. It's very important. So I will just remind the audience that we still have one last session as a closing remarks, and to give the awards for the people that present in Discord. Amelia, we do have a channel in Discord if you want to join us. There is a channel specific for diversity and inclusion. So if you want to share links about important topics of what we discussed, you are welcome to join us there in Discord. I think you have the link in your email. If you don't find it, please write to us. We get back to you as soon as possible. So I'd like to thank you very much again. I would like to thank Sean for helping us today and all the people from UNC Charlotte. So thank you.